This message is brought to you by Spirion. The data privacy revolution is the new age of protecting what matters most. Automatically and persistently discover and classify sensitive data with the most accurate solution on the planet. Understand the data within the context of your business and then take actions to control that data so you can operate with minimal friction and comply with the laws and regulations built to protect the personal data privacy of individuals across the globe. This is Spirion, protecting what matters most. Visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/Spirion. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Make sure you register for our upcoming webcast and virtual training by going to securityweekly.com. Select the webcast training drop-down menu from the top menu bar. Gravwell will be our next webcast, cutting through marketing buzzwords and teaching you about collecting and analyzing logs in hybrid cloud environments. We talk a little bit about that, of course, on tonight's show. The webcast will actually walk you through exactly how to do that and dig into some of the details. So we've been leading up to this webcast with Gravwell, and I'm very excited about it. Peter Smith is here with us, our good friend, no stranger to the show. He is the founder and CEO at Edgewise, a serial entrepreneur. One of the more technical founders, of course, that comes on our show to talk about all things zero trust. You can go to securityweekly.com/Edgewise and get a demo, a trial. I strongly encourage our listeners to check it out. Every time we talk with Peter, I'm like, wait, we need that software. Like that's important. We should have that. So Peter, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me again. It's great to be here, even though I can't be in the studio, which is typically a lot more fun.
Yes. These are different times that we live in today, of course. I do have to say, Peter, our hosts, I won't go into too much detail, but we evaluate a lot of vendors. And they were singing your praises after we were talking to various vendors this week. And they just came back with Edgewise does a really good job at this. So you are doing fantastic things. And we are very excited to talk about, what is our topic for this segment, Peter?
Oh, man. It's kind of unexpected, so I don't have the typical levels of preparation, but I'll tell you what, the thing that is just standing out to me is customers shifting their strategy to their desktops as people are working from home. Yeah. One of our customers called up and said, every one of our employees, they typically work at their desk at their physical desktop workstation, and every single one of them is taking that desktop home along with their monitors, their keyboards, their mice.
Wow.
And they're setting it up at home. They're putting Wi-Fi USB adapters into the back of the devices so that they can work remotely, right? Because this is organizations that didn't have laptops, and now you're taking these what used to be fixed function devices and you're saying they're now quote unquote portables. That's a massive shift. And I think people are caught a little flat-footed on what sort of protections need to be in place on those systems.
And I do have to say, as I try not to watch the news all the time and read the news all the time, but when it's on in the house, because we do need to stay informed and make intelligent decisions about what we believe and what we don't believe, and a lot of that has gone on in the past couple of weeks, of course. But when I hear the news outlets talking about working from home, red flags go off, right? Just even the basic things about understanding that your Wi-Fi connection is very much separate from your internet connection, and how those things will play out is completely missing, and they seem to just mix all these things together. I also think that largely the internet's going to crash because we're all working from home. I'm like, whether we work from home or work from the office, the internet's going to be fine, right? Like your VPN concentrators and such may see an increased load.
Those will fall over.
There's some really smart people that created the internet, and I have a lot of confidence that the internet is going to be just fine with this. Just the switch from working in the office from home.
And I got to tell you, some of the things that I'm seeing from some of the providers that, like, they know people are switching from home, so they're removing data caps, and some of them they're actually bumping the level of service from this speed to this speed, and I'm like, well, shit, you've had all this capacity from in the past, and now you're giving it away for free?
I am also,
exactly.
but I'm also confident that the engineers working for the ISPs to handle this capacity. And if we all, know how the internet works in TCP/IP, like I think we're going to be fine, right? In terms of the general sense of things, there are certain cases where if you're VPNing back into a central point, that could be problematic, right? If you're not planning for that capacity.
Look, we all owe John Postel a degree of thanks here. We should pray to the John Postel.
Yep, Vint Cerf, and many
and Vint Cerf and Licklider as well. Yeah,
Peter.
I disagree on the ISP side.
Peter, and then Lee.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we've just seen a massive explosion of traffic. It seemingly happened overnight, where one customer in particular steady state connection rate of around 5,000 connections a second, and all of a sudden it just goes up to 25,000 connections per second. And it's because the services they offer, people are concerned, they're logging into the accounts, they're checking, and that just creates a massive increase in load. And that's just one customer. You have to imagine across all of the services that deliver, remote working and, cloud service providers that are, doing even Google Docs or Office 365, so on and so forth, they're seeing a massive increase in load.
Mm-hmm. Hold on, Lee.
So what I was going to say is back at my office is in Livermore, California, which is San Francisco Bay Area, and they're on shelter in place. So not only is my company sending everybody home, all the high-tech companies in the area, including companies like Oracle, Chevron, Clorox, Workday, all their employees are working from home. So what we're seeing in that area, initially we saw some challenges on the VPN, but now what we're seeing is the ISPs are failing. And some people are reverting from, say, their Comcast account to using their phone as a hotspot, and those services are failing too. They're all congested. Whereas I'm working away with no problems up here in Idaho because I don't have the same ISP. We are connected. My business, the lab, is connected to its Energy Sciences ISP with two 100 gigabit connections. That's not the problem.
Yeah, I think San Francisco is.
Are you humble bragging right now?
It's not so humble.
A little bit guilty, but I wanted to make sure I had the scale set.
Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to lay blame on any provider or application provider or anything yet, but I was supposed to be on a call yesterday for a working group that I'm a part of. There was a global working group. We were attempting to use WebEx, which is now owned by Cisco, and they eventually just had to cancel it just because nobody could get on completely and get any kind of audio working, and people were trying to dial in on the phone lines, and that wasn't working. And I think I attributed it to just the increased load that everybody now is trying to do teleconferencing, and it's not necessarily the internet, pipes that are struggling. It's the infrastructure around the applications and the services that are.
Yeah. Just to put it in
I think
perspective, I've got. Sorry, I spoke over you. Go for it.
We're all trying to jump in there. I think you're going to have winners and losers kind of emerge out of this. Like your go-to meeting stuff, your Zoom folks. I mean, everybody sees the benefit of trying to scale up and handle this load, and it's an interesting test, to be honest. I don't think the ISPs are really going to be the problem, except for the smaller kind of ISPs. I mean, I where I am, I have a local incumbent that dropped the fiber to me and 100 megabits symmetric, and it's great. I haven't had but not everybody fortunate is that. to have ISPs that are that dedicated.
Yep.
There's a lot of shared bandwidth out there. There's a lot of coax out there still. And it's just not quite the same. It's not universal.
The irony is, Joff, as you were saying, I haven't had a single dropout.
Yeah, you were dropping out.
You were dropping.
That's neither here nor
That's
there.
the way it always goes with technology.
How do you know that's my problem?
Could be ours. Could be ours.
Yep.
True.
Yep.
Sorry.
and I will say, we've been doing lots of video conferencing and that
Yeah.
type of stuff because the kids' karate school has moved to Zoom, and
Yeah,
We-
same here.
we-
I was shocked by that.
I know I wasn't shocked. It's a great thing, and it's been working great for us. We haven't had a single stutter. It's been great. But then again, I only have 75 up, 75 down, but it's business class FiOS. So it's business.
get a true 75 up,
It's a true
75
75,
down. You're not
70
sharing,
down, dedicated with quality, with a specific quality of service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's mine too, right?
And then again, I also pay for that.
QoS.
Then I pay for that.
I'm
too.
paying for that. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, Peter, you were trying to speak earlier.
Oh no, I was just marveling at sort of how we've shifted our day-to-day activities to these platforms. Like I was on a call, came downstairs, and I saw my kid doing karate in the living room to an iPad, which turns out was a Zoom meeting with his karate instructor. It's just sort of bonkers how we're reorganizing.
So,
Yeah,
Peter,
without-
what are the security concerns? You mentioned something I thought was interesting, is that there are businesses that, and we were talking about this earlier, right? That they didn't issue laptops necessarily to their employees, right? And they had desktops. And then this crisis happens, and rightfully so, people are working from home in trying to isolate to get through this, and they're taking their desktops home. What does that mean from a security perspective? That's that's an occurrence that,
Pretty sure that violates some sort of security policy. Just
right?
walking
Like that's I would have never
yeah,
envisioned that
absolutely.
happening. Yeah.
I mean, they have to make a business decision, right? They've got a mandate from the governor that they take certain actions, and part of that is about people not being in the same room together. So they're going to go home and think about financial services, where oftentimes there are desktops that are deliberately placed there because they don't want those devices leaving the office. They do not want it taken home, and now they're faced with this decision: do we how do we make people productive, allow them to do their jobs, but they can't be in this physical space? Of course, they're sending devices home, and these devices were in isolated networks that were deliberately segmented out to protect the devices, and now they're sitting on somebody's open Wi-Fi that doesn't even have a password. Of course, there are massive security implications, and people are starting to take a hard look at it.
Yeah, I can just see that with my kids, for example, and going, oh, there's a new PC in the house. Like, can I play games on this? Right? And the bad things that could happen as a result.
You take that a step further,
mention
though, and you start to think about, you have kids' iPads, or you have your wife's computer that she looks on Pinterest all day with. These things are connected to the same local network. You're relying on consumer-grade protections from firewalls and ISPs that are typically not designed to handle like denial of service or even some of the security aspects. This is all these different devices are coming under from a corporate really hard exterior to a really soft exterior and a lot of hostile devices. And from an attacker's standpoint, that makes it very difficult as well, because we're not targeting an individual company that has a certain IP range. We're targeting, thousands of remote workers now. So this becomes a kind of a difficult situation where targets of opportunity, I think, are going to pop up, where an attacker may have malware or something on a computer and then notices a corporate device on the local network all of a sudden, and now you're running into conditions where different corporations are becoming breached based off of just target of opportunity.
I think it opened up.
You couldn't have put it better. Think about the amount of centralized capacity for inspecting traffic, looking for anomalous behaviors. I remember the previous person that you had, a guest you had, 2 episodes ago, he was showing how they collect information about DNS traffic and they analyze it in their SIM, right? Well, the centralized nature of getting that traffic and inspecting it, well, the second you take all of these devices and you put them into people's home networks, they aren't going through that egress point. So therefore, your ability to inspect that traffic goes out the window. So sure, there's the potential for lateral movement. There's exposed attack surface on these unprotected networks. There's also the ability to exfiltrate data through now unprotected egress paths. And the last one I would say is just think about the opportunistic attackers that are taking advantage of this scenario. How many emails have you received about COVID-19, about this is your insurance company, this is your life insurance policy? This is just absolutely target-rich environment to take advantage and social engineer your way into these devices. And once you're on them, you've got these unprotected VPN gateways that really have very lax policies. Because frankly, if it's a desktop, they were crafted in such a rapid fashion that nobody really is scrutinizing them. They're trying to get access. They aren't trying to lock it down. So it's sort of a lot of really bad situations coming together. Many paths externally that are not being scrutinized by the typical mechanisms used in the corporate environment. You've got opportunities for social engineering, exposed attack surface on local networks, and VPNs that were hastily put together to accommodate remote work. That's not a good place to be.
And you know what I find interesting too is that malware that, for example, I don't know if it's TrickBot or Emotet. One of them just came out that it's 2 things, and it was the same malware. I want to say it was TrickBot that would look for Wi-Fi networks and try and brute force passwords of nearby Wi-Fi networks. And what just came out this week that I saw was they're going on the local network, and so the malware gets on. TrickBot then tries to RDP into systems and brute force the password, right? You take those scenarios now where you have corporate assets that are all moving into the home, and maybe that malware is already there or already has a path in on these other systems. Now they're on the same network as all of these corporate assets.
Yeah, another thought I had, because I can't help think PCI, not this week or next, but Patch Tuesday rolls around in April. How are all these workstations that are now in people's homes getting updates?
Yeah, they're gonna do better, actually, Jeff. Hey, look, I wanted to comment.
As long as they're configured that way, right, Jeff? For automatic update?
No, look, my comment is this, right? I mean, the success of remote telework, or I want to call it, in this level of proliferation is going to depend on how well people have architected the network. I mean, the true matter of it is if you actually architected your network to consider the VPN layer as being another module of the access layer of your network, then it should make no difference that are not on your campus versus being on your campus or branch, right? If you architect your network that way and you threw together your VPN in such a way that it was like, oh, let's just give it access to everything because, VPN is VPN, then you are going to suffer consequences. And even worse, if you deployed your VPN such that you're split tunneling and allowing people to access their local network resources as well as talk to the corporate network at the same time, then you're just asking for it. This really, really depends on of the architecture of the networks that are out there. Now, I can tell you right now, a number of pretty sophisticated customers, and many of them are feeling relatively comfortable. I'm not saying all of them. Some of them have had to relax the segmentation controls that they had in place due to the proliferation of remote workers, because something else is at play here, and that is where a corporation might have traditionally had just one group of workers remote, let's say it's the sales team, all of a sudden they have every group of workers remote. And so the requirements completely changed overnight. Now, if the requirements completely changed overnight on you, you have no choice but just to relax your internal segmentation if you had that, for example. And so that's really where the pain is going to be felt.
Not just internal segmentation though, too. Also external access, right? So all these places are having to stand up additional external access that they may or may not have provided to all employees. And so by opening these up, we're going to have a whole bunch of mistakes where two-factor is not enabled on a lot of these concentrators, where you're going to end up with VDI environments that are going to have applications that may or may not have ever been exposed to an external resource. Even external applications, you're going to start to see a lot of lacks there where, again, this target of opportunity from an attacker standpoint, we're going to see, I think, a substantial amount of breach data come out in the months following a lot of this isolation and remote work.
You're right. The pressure is the speed to deployment. Everybody has been forced into the situation of make it work because all of our people are at home.
Make it work yesterday.
And if you are in network engineering job, your first response is going to have to be, okay, I'm just going to turn it and I'm going to deal with the ramifications later.
Exactly.
Well, Jeff, I think your customers are not the norm. I think a lot more companies are going to suffer than perhaps your immediate sphere of influence, and I congratulate you and applaud you on that. But I think a lot of companies are struggling, and I'm just still trying to get my head around a workstation going home rather than a laptop going home. Just the differences in the configuration of a desktop versus a laptop. Not that I've seen a desktop lately, but we talked about this a little bit last week.
I don't think it makes any difference. That's a null point. You take a home, it's just a heavier laptop.
It's just
an organization worth it is already going to have its VPN software pre-configured. All right, if you make that assumption, then the image is there. It's going to just work.
Oh, you're making assumptions. Okay.
That's a hefty assumption. Right. If they don't, and they're assuming the desktop is completely 100% always going to be on the corporate network, then all hell's going to break loose.
But there's another factor too, Joff. If once you get all that traffic going from these now remote systems coming through your VPN concentrators, assuming you're providing a full network connection, that's old school. Your concentrators may choke with the full tunnel connection, and it will be really tempting to turn on split tunneling to give your concentrator a break. And I'll bet you $1 half the companies are doing it. So suddenly that core security control is thrown out the window in the favor of getting the work done during the crisis.
Now, Peter, I want to ask you a question about split tunneling as it applies to zero trust, right? Because it's kind of interesting how that works. We've always had fears about split tunneling, but basically what that boils down to is an issue of trust.
Right.
I couldn't agree more, and it comes down to a fundamental question of, do you actually know what's coming across your VPN? And I would say in most cases the answer is no, because just like a firewall, the VPN is predicated on this notion that you can trust an address, a port, and a protocol.
Right.
And I think I've come on the show a lot, and I've tried to make this case that address, port, and protocol has nothing to do with what is communicating. It's merely the means by which communication occurs. It's like us speaking English. That's just how we're communicating, but it doesn't describe me as Peter or you as Paul.
Right.
So really the question is, you now have a massive workforce that is sending all of their communications across this VPN tunnel. You've likely enabled for flexibility of that workforce so they don't feel like they're too constrained. You've enabled split tunneling. So it really begs this question, frankly, independent of whether you have split tunneling enabled or not. What is the true provenance of this connection, and what initiated it, and what is receiving it? And frankly, you cannot answer that question. That is the whole purpose of software identity. That's what this is all about. And that's why my customers are asking me to enable our auto segmentation on their desktop environments, because they are now shifting their focus and concern at this new egress-ingress point, which, sure, the VPN was there before, but it certainly wasn't carrying 100% of all of the corporate traffic between every employee. So now it is a very significant point of focus, and we need to stop thinking of it as trusted connections. Just because it's a VPN doesn't mean it's trusted. In fact, you have no idea what the true origin and true destination of that traffic is.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. I mean, the VPN provides the confidentiality and integrity of the data, but it doesn't mean anything in terms of the activities of the user itself, right? I mean, it is, in a lot of ways, your insider threat can be your VPN threat and vice versa, right? So, it comes down to in terms of a lot of things, in terms of scale, in terms of security policy, how well has somebody thought ahead and architected their VPN solutions? Has it been a bolt-on, a band-aid, or has it actually been architected to be seen as another portion of the access layer with the same equivalent security policy as the rest of the network? And the people that are in the latter category are going to do much better, right? They're going to be able to scale. They're going to deal with the security policy issues. I would hesitate to guess that most of the population out there is in the former category, where they have to rapidly scale and deal with a wide open policy, and that's really a scary place to be.
Jeff,
I agree with you.
Jeff.
We were hypothesizing about this very thing, I think, on last week's show. I'm curious, Peter, you mentioned that you had a customer today that was taking workstations home. Obviously don't want you to say who your customer is, but are you able to say what sort of industry they're in, what vertical they're in?
I shouldn't.
Okay, no, that's
what
fair.
I'll tell you is that this is not isolated to one customer. There are a lot of organizations where, for various reasons, desktops are issued, and there's no reason to have a laptop, or there are specific reasons to only have a desktop, and they're having to make very difficult decisions.
Okay, let me rephrase the question, because we were hypothesizing last week that perhaps organizations that were higher on the security maturity curve, which tend to be certain industries, but we don't have to mention industries, might be the ones where there are more granular controls, like you don't really need to have a laptop and take it home with you. Only certain, functions, sales executives and stuff like that. Can you comment at all on observations about, who you're seeing that still has workstations, not necessarily from an industry vertical, but from, I guess, from a security maturity, the maturity of their security program perspective?
It's an interesting question. I do not track what the device is, and I do not know if it is a desktop or a workstation. I only know this because people came to me and said, I have a problem, and I think you can solve it. So I only found out that these devices were not mobile because I guess if we'd done an analysis, we could have seen that these devices never disconnected from the network. They never got different addresses, and we could just hypothesize that they were workstations, physical ones. But I did not. Interesting. Getting a connection request that is unauthorized. Speaking of being on a home network.
My guy has a software for that.
That was Larry, by the way.
I was about to say.
I was going to ask if it was one of you guys.
I thought it was Tyler. No.
Everybody
choose wisely.
Yeah, so for us, as I was saying, we really don't track what the device is. We only know if it's a desktop version of the operating system or if it's a server. So we're learning now that some of our customers are having these physical fixed position devices that are now no longer fixed position.
So let me ask another question. Is it more convenient these days that so many office applications are now cloud-based? Does that make the road easier, or does it present different security difficulties?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it presents, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't make a difference. My solution would be agnostic to that, but I think it presents a security challenge to the organizations that are trying to control that access, because again, a lot of the access control mechanisms that are built into the fabric of the network, or the monitoring capabilities that would reside in the network, when your workforce disperses, a lot of those are not host-based services. And again, if you're not using, if you're allowing split tunneling, then you're missing the majority of that traffic, the traffic that's going directly to Office 365, whereas previously it would have been, going through some egress gateway, and you were doing DPI to inspect what the interactions are. You're not doing that anymore. So I imagine that this transition means that organizations are losing a lot of visibility and losing control over the actions that their users were previously taking.
Well, that's an interesting tangent to go off on too. What are the unique challenges, not just for organizations and employees, but for security teams trying to do their job? What are some?
I think
it's a good question.
I think one of the things that we're going to see change here is an acknowledgement that centralized control and monitoring built into something that requires you to be in a given physical location for it to be effective, like plugging into a network, connecting to a Wi-Fi connection in a specific geography that forces your traffic through these devices. It has some very significant limitations when the majority of your workforce does have to distribute. And this notion that the security of a network should actually gravitate towards the periphery, meaning the devices that consume those network resources, it's got a distinct advantage, which is the protection follows the device, independent of the network that it's plugged into, independent of the geography it happens to reside in. And so this is a very substantial change. We used to think of it in these terms because of cloud migrations. People are moving resources into the cloud. You can't put these sorts of network analysis and control appliances into a cloud network. So where do you put this control? You put it into the device itself, the endpoint, the server that lives in AWS or Azure. But now we're seeing this exact same concern follow the desktops because they're no longer getting plugged into the corporate network. So I really do have to believe that there is going to be a reconsideration of whether access control and monitoring should live in the fabric itself, or it should live in the devices that consume those resources. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. It's all about the information, not where the systems necessarily live, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, from an attacker standpoint, like I would probably venture to say that if I were doing this and I was doing this for a long-term game, I would probably be attacking those host-based systems first, setting up that persistence, and then I would lay in wait. I would have a six-month to year timer that checks for the outbound IP or environment variables, so that you're back into the environment you're trying to get into without all those controls. And just lay in the host layer, because like you said, you have the network layer that you're losing all these protections from the outside. You're losing all the access and visibility. You're losing all the network control layers. But that host is where persistence always lives. And having good persistence to get back into a very stringent corporate network is ideal.
I like what Tyler's saying, because essentially what Tyler said is that as everyone works from home, I'm going to turn everyone's computer that's now at home into a Trojan horse, so that when we all bring those systems back in, I'm already inside the network.
Although
it's like the oldest method in the book.
Although if it were my time frame, given the current situation, I'd probably wait closer to 18 months to 2 years on the timer.
Well, I'm interested.
So, I guess that raises the question, Peter. How long is this going to last? How long is the mandatory work from home, this remote situation we find ourselves in? Better put, how many Pulse Security Weeklies are going to be everyone remote?
Well, I mean, we've done that for a long time, and I think the answer is it's going to vary. In my personal opinion,
I agree.
I think there's going to be many organizations, right, a percentage, and I can't predict a percentage, that are going to be like, you know what, working from home wasn't that bad. Maybe we were more productive. Maybe we don't need to go into the office. Maybe we learned how to utilize Zoom and adjust our processes so that we can work from home. I think there's also going to be a huge percentage that's going to be like, God, I can't wait for people to get back in the office because that's where we're productive. It's going to depend on the organization, the environment, and the vertical that they're in their businesses.
Regardless of whether or not this is over, we have now seen a monumental shift in the way we do business and where we're doing business from, and that is not going away.
No.
10 weeks minimum is my prediction before people even consider it. 10 weeks minimum.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. I mean, that depends on a lot of factors, and I think that's going to vary by geographic region as well.
And not to fearmonger, but I did see national news, what was it, last night, and they were claims that this was fear-mongering was that one of the stories here in the U.S. on the national news was that things will not start to return to normal until we have a vaccine, and the vaccine will take 18 months to develop.
Yeah, but that's...
That's kind of a fear-mongering type of thing, and either way, things will not return to normal. This is the new normal, in that which we have the ability to do so much remote telework and work from home that this is going to become a new thing that we have realized that is actually a sustainable model.
I think there's a huge percentage of the population that realizes that they can work from home now that maybe didn't realize that until they were forced to do it.
Right.
Jeff?
Yeah, it's weird for me because I've been working from home essentially for the last 20 years.
Right.
You know, working from home being I'm a traveling consultant. I go to the client site for weeks, days and weeks on end. And when I'm not traveling, I'm at home. But I wanted to ask Tyler and Joff, Peter, you can certainly weigh in too, because we asked the question last week about sort of this, from an attacker perspective. What are the opportunities, and we've talked about how attackers are going to are opportunistic and they're going to take advantage of things. And just dovetailing off of what Tyler said a few moments ago, I'm curious, if you're putting on your attacker mindset, are you now trying to find everybody in your neighborhood? Are you going after particular companies? Or are you, it used to be you could just go to Starbucks and see who you can get. My point being that at least in the commercial world, very few companies are specifically targeted because the attacker wants to go after that particular company. They just find companies that are vulnerable to the things that they can exploit, and they can steal data and monetize it.
Crime of opportunity.
How does that change in this world? How does the attacker mindset change when the attack surfaces change, for lack of a better word? Joff, Tyler, Peter, because you guys weren't around last week when we were talking about this.
So I think it's going to be a crime of opportunity, and I think it's largely going to be driven by the fact that people's home life is going to blur into their work life, and so their machines that they take home are not 100% going to be on the VPN, and there is going to be the normal malware crimes that occur against home-based machines, and those driving those malware attacks realize that those home-based machines very quickly realized are actually corporate machines, and they're going to use it as a leverage point to take it further. So it's going to be opportunity again, in my opinion. It's just more opportunity.
I would say that the big thing you're going to see from this is going to be a huge rise in IoT level attacks. You're going to see remote exploits being developed very heavily for consumer grade firewalls and wireless routers.
And maybe things like Drobo, which we'll cover in the next
segment.
segment.
Like local SANs backups, because again, this is an entirely different problem and situation that companies are going to have to deal with. Is if they're not leveraging something like DFS or some of the network file storage, backing up these particular devices is going to be relied on heavily at home. So you're going to have things like local network storage. You're going to have external hard drives. So I think we're going to see a huge proliferation of kind of consumer grade malware and consumer grade exploits so that they can begin looking for those opportunities, not necessarily as targeted, but hey, we have an exploit that will pop all the Linksys routers or cable modems. What sits behind those? Are any of those targets of opportunity that we could leverage for something big later?
I guess what's scary, based on what you guys are saying, is that I feel like that there's probably a lot of companies that were relatively secure, had relatively mature security programs that now are going to become targets because of the fact that their workforce, and not the workforce that they originally planned on being remote workers, are now remote workers, and all the things that we've described rolled together.
Yeah, they relied on layered security, and the only place where every layer was always in force was if you were in the corporate environment. You had inbound protections from the globally routable internet. You had outbound filtering. You had host-based protections, and in concert, those all working together, you had a relatively secure security posture. Now you take that and you say all of those surrounding layers, those will never be in place. Well, at least for not the next 10 weeks, if your assessment is accurate. And what you have now is a lack of consistent control, lack of consistent visibility, and inconsistent protection. It's not what it would have been on-prem. And I have to agree with Tyler that I think the opportunity here is, how do you transition from devices that are consumer devices, whether it's an IoT device or your iPhone or Android device, that is a great place to gain a foothold. But how do you transition into the device that gets you access into that corporate resource? You yourself don't have a VPN client that can be leveraged for it. You need to get into that workstation or that laptop to then piggyback through the VPN access. So if I were an attacker, I would be looking for these opportunities to pivot from my point of entry, like that router, as Tyler was saying, and transition into the corporate device that gives me access to the resources I need.
It's interesting how this situation has, of course, catastrophic effects, and it's horrible. But when we put that in the lens of information security, the kind of network protections that we've relied on in some capacity really fall down, and it should be forcing us to think about the applications, the users, and the data. And organizations that have not already embraced that are going to be in a really interesting situation and perhaps at a disadvantage, right? How do you control which applications are authorized? How do you validate those applications, validate the users? How do you protect the data when you don't have control over where those things live? I don't know where my users are. I don't know where their machines are. I know that they use applications. I know that they have data. I'm going to protect that. And the users can be wherever they want to be.
Yeah, I agree, Paul.
Sorry, go for it.
I agree with you, Paul, because I think given that the data was already out there primarily on mobile devices and tablets and things like that, and it's not a new conversation. It's been going on for several years.
Sure.
Protect the data. Now maybe this situation is forcing that in a positive way. And I guess I'm also concerned, and I don't mean to be. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I don't like throwing FUD around, but I really feel like, based on our conversation last week and this week, that there are attackers out there that now really can target specific companies because they've been traditionally hidden behind layers of network security, but now they're out there. So the bad guy, and even we talk about hacktivism and people not necessarily doing their attacking for financial gain, which is what's more likely is the case these days. But and I can't believe I'm saying this, but nation state actors, people that want to go after companies for whatever reason, now they have a way to do that. Now they can start targeting those companies in a way that they've never been able to before. They've never bothered before.
let's do a thought exercise here, right? And maybe we can even do it with a web page to make it more real. I won't do that because I don't want to put somebody's picture up. But let's say you wanted to target Red Hat. I'm just choosing a random well-known company out of thin air. And you are physically located in the town of Chelmsford, Massachusetts. Well, you could go to LinkedIn and you could say, search for employees who list their location as Chelmsford. Now you have the name of a person, you know that they approximately live in Chelmsford, and you know they work at Red Hat. So now you simply use one of the myriad services that allows you to look up a name and a company, and it tells you their location, their physical address, their home address. You drive to that home address and you poke around to see what the Wi-Fi signal strength is. If you're parked out front, the one with the strongest signal strength is likely that person's house. And now you just hammer on it until you have access to that Wi-Fi, get into the device. Presumably they're connected over a VPN and you're done. And if you're sophisticated enough to do that, you've likely also looked at what their role was in the company. So you know that they likely have administrative credentials because they're a systems administrator, and they probably also use the VPN.
Yeah.
So I'll take that a step further for you. And there are data sets and services out there that allow you to leverage different SSIDs as far as a search characteristic that can be pinpointed to a geolocation and or correlated based on an ad tracking ID. So you can get travel patterns and or, all these people that had left a particular address and then went out. And then now you're seeing the same SSID beacons. You can then kind of correlate where these physical addresses are and start to build a target profile based on, stuff all from the internet.
Wiggle.net. I mean, this is stuff.
And
Larry and I. I mean,
and Wiggle.
I mean, we started this in 2005, right, when Wi-Fi hacking was just coming on to be a more prominent attack vector on the scene. And, legit, those were the days where you would have to get permission from the company to be like, I want to target your executives. We would do exactly what Tyler was talking about 15 years ago. And 15 years ago or more, the Wi-Fi networks were open. And so you'd find the executive. It's just,
if they weren't open, it was WEP.
And it was WEP, right?
Time.
And it's OSINT that just takes on a different form to figure out, like Peter said, where that person is, target their network, and then you're piggybacking on their VPN. We've become full circle on that now as the situations have forced us all to work from home.
Isn't there a Wi-Fi WPA2 vulnerability that just came out? I seem to recall reading about that.
So Jeff Warren on your team was talking about how you don't. So, and Larry's a question for you.
Yep.
You don't need to necessarily capture the entire WPA2 handshake anymore.
Nope.
This was about a year ago, right? You get the PMK.
Yeah, PMK ID, which is advertised in the first of the four-way handshake. The first two of the four-way handshake. So all you need to do as a potential client is go, hey, I'd like to join the network. And they go, okay, here's a packet. Let's start the authentication scheme, and here's a PMK ID. And that's all you need to be able to crack the PMK.
To go into Hashcat, and we did an entire virtual training on that today on how to build a password cracking rig for about $6,000 that would include like 4 1080 Ti cards. And do that at a very, very rapid rate. And many of Tyler, Larry, you guys have these rigs sitting around, right?
Do it at Amazon too.
Yep, or you can do it in Amazon. Yep.
And but so that's you don't even need to do the authentication and capture four-way handshakes.
Right.
You just do the authentication and capture the result, and you're off to the races. There's also the new one if they're doing called Crook.
Yes.
Which is a variant or a subsequent follow-on to the crack attack, in that if you deauth a client, oftentimes their transmit buffer is still filled, and you deauth them, they disconnect, they wipe the keys from memory, and then they transmit the rest of the data with default keys of all zeros. So effectively plain text.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Boom.
Scary stuff.
Now, it's only 32K of data. But you just keep doing it. Lots of data.
So how can Edgewise help?
Oh man,
all this gloom and doom.
Really, what we're doing for customers is we're taking their desktop devices, putting it in a segment, and auto segmenting it, really. And the simple point here is that any communication that goes over the VPN, we're now verifying the identity of the software that's trying to interact with the business application over the VPN. So if, for instance, you need to give access to the ERP system, we can make sure that it's, Tom's laptop running the SAP app. That's actually the FAT client that's connecting over the VPN to access the SAP backend. And what that effectively means is that no other software is allowed to interact in any way with that application because it's being verified down to the cryptographic identity of the communicating software. And that takes about 30 minutes to do. It's really straightforward. Typically, we would put a segment around all the desktops, auto segment it to protect all inbound, internal, and outbound connectivity. We would leave it in a simulate block mode, which is not actively blocking. It's more akin to monitoring to make sure that the policy set does what you want the policy set to do. Leave it there for about 3 to 5 days. You'll know very quickly if it's not doing what you intended to do, or if there's a rapid rate of change in sort of the applications your customers are using. And then we switch it to a full blocking mode, and you're done.
Now, Peter, I have a question. Are you
please.
validating that application? Like, does Edgewise validate that whether it's the browser or the FAT client that's accessing the ERP application is in fact that application, and when it gets updated, right? Like that's a feature in Edgewise. Like you can validate an application that this is really a browser. It's not someone injecting in a process or something else.
Yes,
it's that browser, right?
That's a great point. Do you mind if I share my screen quickly?
No, please do.
So let's see. Just trying to find the People Finder app. So let's see, here we go. If I look at like Active Directory, for instance, and I map its connections, to your point, we're getting down to the software identity level. And so if you were to look at this process here, you can see that these are the identity properties that we're verifying on both sides of the communication to ensure that it's only the legitimate software communicating that's supposed to be communicating. So we do this in real time for every single connection that occurs. So in the case of, let's say, the LSAS process, what you can see here is I have some policies in place that are allowing these interactions. So if we were looking at this dsreg command, we're verifying that it's dsreg here running on this identified desktop 1 that's talking to this LSAS process here. Now, if Patch Tuesday comes along, which it will, that's not going to stop. You upgrade your software. What happens then? Absolutely nothing. So all of the policies that are applied to this, you can see it's outbound allowed connectivity. We are mapping together identities of like software. So this is one identity here. This is a completely distinct identity here. And we're establishing the provenance of the software. Where did the software come from? And you can see here that by verifying the signing certificate of the software, we can establish that it came from Microsoft and it's part of the Windows operating system, just as this one was previously. But you'll note that the SHA-256s are actually different. This is 3A. This starts with E3. And so part of our patented technology is doing a similarity scoring of the software to say, you know what, there's a policy applied to this old piece of software. A new version of it came from Microsoft, and the code is like 90% similar. So we're just going to merge these two identities together, automatically apply the policy that was on the old one to the new one, and you are done. You did not have to lift.
So, Peter, a nuance that I think is really important is that you're not just relying on the signing certificate in what you just said.
No, that would be crazy. And the reason is this. What I would do as an attacker, I love sort of putting myself in the mindset of what would I do if I was an attacker.
Right.
And my answer would be, I would take telnet.exe, which is signed by Microsoft, and I would rename it to dns.exe and replace the DNS server on your domain controller and use the telnet client as if it were a proxy to intermediate all of the DNS requests, manipulate them to then redirect all of the traffic to some other address port and protocol. And if you're just looking at who signed software or something like that, you have no idea whether it's it came from the right place, but it's not the right software. I can use an administrative tool to do bad things too.
It's a great point. There's a difference between validating the software is actually that software versus this is software that came from a validated place. In other words,
yeah. So you got there's actually a new capability. Development doesn't stop just because there's a global pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We're releasing new features all the time, and one of those new features that helps organizations handle change faster is this thing that we're calling auto resegment. So in previous shows, I've shown this a multitude of times, so I won't belabor the point, but we've taken microsegmentation and network protections and reduced it to a single click action, literally a button that says auto segment. And so what we're doing now is, as the environment changes, how do you accommodate that change without having to manage a lot of policies? So what we're doing now is something called auto resegment. Active Directory here has already been auto segmented, and after you auto segment, the button changes to say auto resegment. So let me show you what this actually does. It's kind of interesting. If I take a completely new piece of software that has never been seen in the environment, we're going to call it new app 4444, and we're going to point it at an AD server, and we're going to put it at port 389, something like that. And maybe we point it at port 88 as well. They're both part of the LSAS process. Now, this new app has never been seen before. And what we want to do is we want to accommodate these behaviors. And what you can see here is that this new app, which may be malicious, it may not be malicious, it's never been seen before, it is blocked by default, as you would expect, because we've got this whole segment protected. Now, how do I know what policy to modify, and how do I know how to modify it? Well, this is a classic example of an ML problem. So what we're telling you here is this was blocked. It's not part of the policy set. And the reason it was blocked was because of the default actions of Active Directory. So what do? Well, what you do is my Zoom toolbar is always in the way. Getting used to this remote work thing.
Right.
So you come back to the Active Directory and you click auto resegment. It confirms your protection, inbound, outbound, and internal, covering every single path of communication, even communications that go over loopback, IPv6, IPv4, over your VPN connection. It doesn't matter what it is, the connections are verified. And you reaffirm that. And what it does is it takes this and it says, hey, this is the policy that needs to be modified. This is how it needs to be modified. And you are literally done. The only thing you need to do is click auto resegment, and the entire process is complete. Now, you could also just ignore this and say, I don't care about that change. You can see that there's a path that's being blocked that hasn't yet been assigned. You could click the auto assign, and it takes care of building the policy set out for you. And now all you need to do is click that auto resegment, and you are done. Pretty cool, right?
Fantastic. That's awesome.
Of course, you did all this following change control procedures, right?
Of course.
Absolutely. You would always follow change control procedures, especially,
because you wouldn't want to put your PCI compliance at risk.
That's right. Or prevent someone from working. In any case, Peter, thank you so much for coming on Paul's Security Weekly. SecurityWeekly.com/Edgewise. Make sure you check it out. Obviously, fantastic stuff, and you can get into even more detail than Peter just went into in the quick kind of 3-minute demo that he did. So, Peter, again, it's always wonderful having you on the show. It was a fantastic discussion. And with that, we'll take a short break. Come back with security news for this week. Stay tuned.